I have come to you with questions. August 13th was a Wednesday last year. I was with a dear friend on Ann Arbor's Main Street, strolling past the Broken Egg Diner in the late evening streetlight. Enjoying the easy warmth of an Ann Arbor summer, we traded tales of the breaking news in our lives. We had made this into a tradition. Each Wednesday for more than 2 years now, we spent evenings losing ourselves in each other's stories. After crossing the intersection of Main and Catherine, the two of us passed by a large white pickup truck with 3 white young men inside. The driver's attention was on the red light that held them from their destination. The others seemed to be yelling at whatever caught their attention: the blaring alcohol, the blaring radio, the damned red light. My friend and I walked at our typically lazy pace, undeterred by the partying strangers. In the next second, I was the subject of their shouting. "Hey!" darted the one in the front passenger's seat. My friend and I pretended to pay no mind to the voice fewer than 15 feet from our ears. Maybe he wasn't even talking to us. "Hey, you with the dreadlocks! Come here!" He insisted in a hotter tone this time. Not only was he talking to us, but he was shouting at me, I thought. I would not relent. I wrestled every morsel of my attention to my walk, to my conversation, to my friend. And the traffic light flipped green. At this point in the story, I should say that I hold a degree from Vanderbilt University and 2 degrees from the finest conducting studio of the United States, that of the University of Michigan. I am one of fewer than 12% of Americans who hold a terminal degree. Fewer than 1/10 of those degrees are held by people who share my skin tone. And I am the first member of my entire family to earn a graduate degree. I am the 2013 winner of the American Choral Directors Association National Graduate Student Conducting Competition. And when I am at my best, my life is an inspiration to my family, who for the first time will not have to think of becoming a doctor as an unattainable abstraction. But, of course, as the tire screeched into forward action, the young man did not call me Dr. Rideout. He did not call me sir, or champion, or inspiration. No, the name he had for me was not designed to highlight the achievements of my existence or even to criticize the magnitude of my failures. It was a name designed to warn all in earshot of the brown color of my skin, as if my mere existence were dangerous or disgusting. A name I had been taught to loathe and to fear since I was a child. One that I had learned to recognize as a harbinger of violence, a foretelling of terror. a name designed to pulverize the dignity of any human who receives it, to render him ashamed of his color, his culture, his history, his human being. A name now hollering itself into the Ann Arbor air, encased in the voice of a white man's drunkenness. It was the third time that year. Trayvon Martin was killed in Florida in 2012. A neighborhood watch volunteer chased him, engaged the teenager against the advice of the police dispatcher he had called to report Trayvon, shot the unarmed child, and was acquitted of murder after 15 hours of jury deliberation. And I know that when the voices of Floridians gather in their streets and shout, "Black Lives Matter," that they are crying for the many young black men who face unwarranted gun violence in America every single day. I know that they know that their voices must ring out because Trayvon can no longer speak. Eric Garner died after having been placed in a chokehold for allegedly resisting arrest. He had been accused by Officer Daniel Pantaleo of selling single cigarettes on the street without a tax stamp. The policy of the New York Police Department prohibits the use of chokeholds, but Officer Pantaleo was never indicted. And I know when the hundreds of New Yorkers lay themselves down to disrupt streets, to disrupt squares, to disrupt mall entrances, that they are lamenting the very disruption of their own safety. I know that the silent handwritten signs they're wearing, which conjure Eric's last words, "I can't breathe," cry out loudly for a nation where the officers of peace are never the perpetrators of thoughtless violence. I know they mean that we cannot breathe, we cannot survive as a nation so long as our criminal justice system subjects our black and brown Americans to a stunningly disproportionate amount of violence and imprisonment. Michael Brown met his demise at the hands of a law enforcement officer, too. Brown was reported to have stolen a few mini cigars from a convenience store in Ferguson, Missouri. Later that evening, Officer Darren Wilson spotted Michael with a friend. He gave chase and followed the unarmed teenager on foot. After a while, Michael stopped his running and began to turn around to face the officer, at which time Officer Wilson fired his weapon several times. There are still Americans in Ferguson, Missouri, with hands above their heads. They are yelling over and over, "Don't shoot," as they march. And I know they want to see a Ferguson where an 18-year-old's petty theft is treated as an opportunity for rehabilitation, not extermination. I hear America in mourning, and I know you do too. And I believe we must mourn with our America. I believe we must tell these stories because they are our stories. I believe it is right to call attention to our nation's faults, its tragedies, its pervasive shame in the hope of causing the conversations and actions that dismantle injustice and erect communities of peace. But I also fear that if we accept the temptation to distill the injustices facing us to tropes of gunshots, to questionable police work, to other cities and blacker situations, we risk even greater tragedies. The tragedy of oversimplification when American racism is so complex. The tragedy of guilt when the nation needs people who know hope. The tragedy of isolation when our cities cry out for community. The tragedy of paralysis when the system needs people who know how to move. If Trayvon's and Eric's and Michael's are the only stories we know, we stand to miss the greatest threat of American racism, its cunning ubiquity. Truly, for every Trayvon in Sanford, Florida, there are countless Doctors Rideout in Ann Arbor, Michigan. For every Eric, there are many Americans who, no matter what their station or achievement, are convinced with insidious words and deeds that they can never truly escape the chokehold of racial discrimination. For every unarmed victim of police violence, there are hundreds of black men who live the rest of their lives behind bars for nonviolent drug charges. For every man who has died, 1,000 Detroit children live in the unrelenting grip of abject poverty. And each of these stories tells us that the call to action did not sound then, it is sounding now. The opportunities for us to impact the conversation don't just exist out there, but right here on our main streets. We could be the church that waits. We could be the church that sits idly while other hands struggle to bend the moral arc of the universe toward justice. And we can be the church that settles with merely educating itself thoroughly to the pervasive schedule of death and disenfranchisement that befalls our fellow Americans and fellow Michiganders and fellow Ann Arborites. We could sit down week after week and lament the world we have inherited from the safety of this beautiful, beloved community. And while the refrain rings out across our nation, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, Black Lives Matter, we can be the church that remained tacit, overwhelmed by the enormity of the system that dares us to stop it. But we are not that church. No, we are the church of Robert Glazier, a conductor of the Underground Railroad. And we are the church that forthrightly spoke out against the practice of slavery while others splintered in the heat of that 1865 debate. And we are the church of Eliza Sunderland, who in 1892 failed to be deterred when the University of Michigan would not welcome scholars of her gender to teach. Instead, she built this church's Bible study into a 100-student forum, bringing a religious message, a liberal religious message to an unprecedented number of university students. We are the church that built a network of nearly 500 children and adults who continue to this day the mission that William Ellery Channing described when he challenged us not to stamp our minds upon the young, but to stir up our own, to inspire a fervent love of truth, to awaken the soul. We are a founding member of Alpha House, the interfaith network that saw the plight of our city's homeless families and has sheltered and talked with and eaten with and laughed with and helped to empower our neighbors that are so often forgotten. And when we saw the mounting legal and cultural discrimination against our lesbian sisters, our gay brothers, our trans and queer family, we gathered a mass of our community together. We asked each of them to bring their best selves to the table. We asked each of them to bring their voice, their soprano, their tenor, their alto, their bass. We asked each of them to come together and form an ensemble. And with that call, some of us facilitated safe, honest conversations. Some of us cooked meals for those conversations. And some of us wrote songs for those conversations. And some of us used those conversations to lead our whole congregation into greater awareness. We became the church of interweave. We became a welcoming congregation. We became the church that celebrates and affirms and promotes the sanctity of marriage equality for all people. And when I walked into these doors for the first time on a Sunday morning 8 years ago, still scarred with the experience of a gay-bashing church, you became the congregation that sang, "We are gay and straight together, and we are singing, singing for our lives." And the earnestness of your song changed my life. We are a congregation with a broad vision, massive creative and intellectual potential, and a strong voice built of singing and speaking and loving. 150 years of time and action have brought us to this moment, where we rejoice in the abundance of stories and people who have changed their world in our name. I'm reminded of the humanist theologian Burdett Bacchus, who tells us that we are not only children, inheritors, but also builders of the beloved community. For as much as we enjoy the safety and solace of the community that has worked to bring us to this day, we are equally tasked with taking the next steps and drawing the circle of justice wider in whatever ways we can. I said I've come with questions. So here they are. Yes, Black lives matter to us. But will this church matter to Black lives? Yes, the refrain is loud and potent. Black lives matter. Black lives matter. But will we write a verse? How will it sound? And when will we write it? Each January, Ann Arbor's Second Baptist Church leads a community march to remember Dr. King, to remember Selma, Alabama, to remember that our walk for justice is not nearly at an end. Next winter, will we be among them? And will we be 5 voices or 500 voices? Will we adapt the model that Interweave taught us and establish a thriving forum for safe, honest conversations about the plague of racism in our communities? Will the writers of this congregation begin holding poetry and prose circles where creative minds can give voice to complex experiences, resisting the temptation to be silent with the power of the pen? Will our music leaders build a singing institute, equipping our voices to bring hope and perseverance in the form of song to the front lines of rallies and demonstrations and protests that call for racial justice? Will our historians and our geographers and Black history scholars and social workers be allowed to show us how to educate ourselves about the suffering system of discrimination in which we live and new ways we might teach our children? Will we engage young religious Unitarian Universalists and our tech-savvy community members to discover and teach us innovative ways we can utilize social media to promote and affirm this call to action? Will our movie buffs and our couch potatoes rise up from their chairs and work to compile a list of films and documentaries and YouTube videos and online resources we can use to raise our awareness together, so that when we go out into the world, our knowledge runs as deep as our aspirations? In the year 2165, 150 years from this moment, when the Church of Tomorrow, when Glen Thomas Rideout VII, when Dr. Glen Thomas Rideout VII, when he sits down and opens the book of our history to know what we meant to racial justice, will he find a page? What will he write about us in his mini history? The time to answer is right now, because tomorrow's history is written today. And for this time, in this corner of the world, we are the ones we have been waiting for. We simply must be. We are the ones we've been waiting. We are the ones we've been waiting. Sing with me. We are the ones we've been waiting. One more time. We are the ones we've been waiting. Now listen. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Sing to pray. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Sing to know. We are the ones we've been waiting for. Sing to believe that we are the ones we've been waiting for. Yes, we are. We are the ones we've been waiting for. We are the ones Go now into your corners of the world, knowing that your community needs your voice. Your voice is part of our voice. And together, our song can be full of hope, full of action, full of the prophetic gift that says to the world, there is another way. Go with peace on your mind. Go with love in your eyes. Go with justice in the very soles of your feet. Amen.